So if you haven't figured it out, tricks or hacks are little things that you can do to kind of help you with little frustrations that we deal with all the time when there's no reason to, because there are much simpler, easier solutions that are just right under your nose with a little bit of cleverness. So let's go ahead and look at some more of them that apply to the automotive garage or shop. As if a transverse mounted engine isn't painful enough with the front of the engine being 2 inches from the firewall. In some cases, you want to find top dead center on a cylinder. Maybe you're doing a timing belt or whatever. And it's frustrating because you try to line up with the crankshaft and you get onto the crankshaft bolt, but it's impossible to turn and keep your wrench on there while you're feeling for compression in the cylinder, because it's really kind of a two-hand job to hold this thing steady. There's an easy fix for this. Just set right up onto your crankshaft bolt and then use a platform and a jack stand and just set your extension bar right in the little crook of the jack stand, and it will hold in place for you as if somebody else is helping you. You can get your finger onto the hole and look for your compression, and there we go. One of my amazingly observant viewers noticed that in all of my diagnostic electrical testing videos, my DVOM has a rubber band on it, and he once asked me, what is the deal with the rubber band? Is that something to help secure the DVOM where I can hold it in position or something? And actually, no, this is another one of my little hacks, actually. Let me show you. So if you are familiar with the DVOM, you know one of the most dangerous things you can do is accidentally leave it in current detection configuration. And if you finish doing a milliamp test for current draw or something like that, and you accidentally leave your meter in this condition, so then when you maybe later that day or even a few days later go to do a voltage test, but you forget that you are in configuration for testing amperage, then you think you are measuring voltage across the terminals to see if you've got signal to an EGR valve or a fuel injector or something. But what you are actually doing is putting 12 volts from the PCM directly to ground with no load in between, and thus frying the PCM as opposed to testing for voltage. So as a way to prevent myself from forgetting and accidentally frying a PCM, whenever I am in an amperage detection mode, I simply slide the rubber band over the dial like that. And that way, when I go to turn off the meter, or if I'm going to turn it to voltage, the rubber band in the way reminds me that I am in current detection configuration, and to switch to my voltage detection configuration so I do not damage a PCM, or in the best case, fry the fuse in my meter. But of course, your worst case would be, of course, that you're shorting to ground a signal from the PCM because of forgetting the configuration. So a very simple hack that can actually save you $1,000. One thing that can be really frustrating is when you are trying to put a bolt or screw into a location where you really can't reach it, and you'd like to have that bolt or screw kind of stick to the socket. So there's actually a couple ways to do this that are pretty easy hacks. One way, of course, is the old piece of tape trick and hold it in place. The only thing I don't like about this is a lot of times it leaves the tape stuck under the screw head, leaving the tape behind or even pulling off with your socket. So not one of my favorite ways of doing this. The way I like to do it, just take a little tiny magnet, a very strong one though, and just put it right to your socket, and that will go ahead and hold it into place. Now, of course, that trick is only going to work if there's not other metal parts that are going to get in the way and catch the magnet. So, my favorite trick for this, because I'm a man, a piece of gum. Kind of tastes like chicken. This drawer in my tool chest is my bad day drawer. This is where I keep all kinds of stuff that I often use when I have a really rusted on bolt that the bolt head rounds off, or broken off bolt heads. So this is all my bolt outs and tapper stuff, left hand drill bits, all of that kind of thing. But one of the most effective tools that I have in here is this candle. So to demonstrate this, I've got this rusty exhaust manifold stud where the nut on top here is rusted on to the point that the whole stud came out instead of just that nut, which of course exhaust manifold studs are notorious for. My favorite product by far is PB Blaster for rust removal and lubrication of these types of things. All kinds of other tricks you can do using other penetrating oils. Heat works very well, of course, but your average home mechanic, such as myself, will not have a welding torch or any kind of extreme heat where you can remove this. Of course, cutting the bolt is always an option, but much to my surprise, I actually learned this trick. I didn't learn this one myself. This one I learned from another YouTube video where I saw some people do this trick, and it works amazing. Let me show you. So for this to work, you will need some threads available, and if you heat up the nut, you really want to heat up the thing that you are trying to remove. We want to expand the nut as much as possible. And of course, most do-it-yourselfers are going to have easy access to one of these typical propane torches. Maybe not nearly as effective as oxyacetylene, but if you give this about 4 minutes or so, and of course, sometimes the heat itself will remove it, but if you're at the end of your rope and nothing is removing the rusty nut, this absolutely works. I was very, very skeptical at first, but I first tried this on a frozen steering knuckle bolt that I could not separate for the life of me. Out of desperation, I went ahead and tried this stupid technique, and lo and behold, it works better than anything I've ever tried before. So as you can see, this is pretty toasty red by now, so we're just going to touch the candle to it and let that kind of wick in. And you want to be careful. Sometimes it can actually catch on fire a little bit, but you can see the wicking action of the wax from the candle there. And normally in this case you would be using vice grips on here, of course, but I'm lucky enough that I've got the nut intact. All right, and the trick is to rock it back and forth a little bit, and actually I'll need to tighten this vise up a little bit more. But eventually you're going to get it to loosen. And after a few minutes, I've now got it to where I can rock it back and forth a little bit. And of course, you don't want to use a 12 point, you want to use a 6 point, have as much contact as possible on this. But once you can rock it just a little bit, by repeating that procedure of adding the heat and the candle, you will eventually be able to get this to a point where it will loosen up on its own quite easily. Once it catches the wax threads, the wax on the threads is the best lubricant that I have seen. It blows away PB Blaster. Trust me, I don't think there's any bigger skeptic on the planet than me, but this candle trick absolutely is one of the most amazing little hacks that I've ever seen. I wish I could remember the name of the YouTube video where I saw this at, but trust me, if you find yourself with no other alternative, go ahead and do the candle trick. It absolutely works amazing. Home garages always seem to have this little lip of concrete that juts into your floor space. So if you use any of these adjustable shelf units here, just adjust the back legs so that they sit on the back of that lip like that, and it can give you an extra 4 or 5 inches of floor space. Do this on both sides of the garage and you've got a good 8, maybe 9 inches of floor space that you can get up to. And honestly, who couldn't use a few extra inches? The other trick to floor space is to have everything off the floor as much as possible. Install as many shelving units. Use the ceiling if you have rafters in the ceiling. Anything you can do to get things off the floor will greatly maximize your floor space, makes it a lot easier to work and a lot safer. And one hack that maybe will cost a little bit of investment, but it's worth every penny. Get retractable cord reels for your accessory stuff. Get one for your drop light. Make sure you have one for an extension cord like this. And if you have it, make sure you get one for your air hose. And if you do that, you will never, ever live without that modification again. If you have a parts cleaner that just had a drain valve on the bottom of it, here's a pretty simple hack to help you to change your solvent real easy. I just used some gas piping and a gas valve here so that if I want to change the solvent, all I have to do is just put a bucket underneath this pipe, open up my valve, and drain out my solvent. And the purpose of the cap is so I don't catch my pants on the sharp edge of the pipe while I'm using the parts cleaner. If you guys are into engine rebuilding, man, I've got dozens of hacks, but just a few of my very best ones. This is just an old soda tray that you would get at a supermarket for 2-liter soda bottles. It happens to have 8 spaces in it. It's perfect for organizing your pistons. And when you finish that rebuild, of course, you're going to want to prime that oil pump. So instead of a fancy oil pump priming tool, all I do is just modify distributor gear by grinding where the gear would have been for the camshaft. And this makes a nice little oil pump tool that I can put on the end of a drill. And that way I can go ahead and just prime the oil pump without, of course, having to turn the engine over and make sure that I've got good oil pressure. And if you're installing a used engine, it's going to come, of course, with all of the electrical harness. Make sure you save those harnesses. These can be really handy. I like to use these so that if I'm testing parts in a car that are very hard to reach, I can simply unplug the connector, put this connector in, and of course with the wire ends it makes it easy for me to do electrical connections or to send voltage directly to the unit and test it. So I've got a box full of all the different electrical connectors for various cars to allow me to do that very easily. Oops, I'm on amperage detection. There we go. And my final, but actually one of my most useful hacks. This is just an old transmission pan that I welded on some wheels to, and it makes a really nice rolling tool holder or parts tray that I can just wheel from one side of the vehicle to the other. I use this all the time when I'm doing brake jobs and stuff like that. But pretty handy little thing you can do with some extra parts you got left over. So that concludes my list of garage tricks and hacks that I find to be most useful for myself. Hopefully they helped you too. What I'm hoping you will do, besides of course like this video, is why don't you share in the comments some of your favorite garage tricks and hacks that fit along this theme, and see if we can share them with both myself, which I'm always interested to find new ways to make life easier, but also with some of the other viewers and subscribers. So please feel free to put your ideas in the comments, and maybe I'll feature them in a future video. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful.